And thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion. My name is Livy. I'm one of 2 learning and participation managers at Autograph, which is a public gallery in Shoreditch, London, where we explore issues around representation, identity, human rights and social justice. I'll give a short audio description of myself. So I'm a white person with short purple hair and I'm wearing a simple black jumper. We're very excited to be hosting this event with Disability Arts Online. I'll be handing over to Joe, who'll be hosting the conversation and introducing the speakers. We are inviting questions from the audience through the event for the Q&A section that will follow the panel discussion. So you can submit a question either by writing a comment on the YouTube video or by emailing me, which is livy@autograph-abp.co.uk. That's Livy, L-I-V-V-Y, at autograph-A for Alpha, B for Bravo, and P for Papa.co.uk. Before I hand over to the panel, I just wanted to provide some context for the programme. So this event has been programmed as part of an open call we run at Autograph each year, with the intention of supporting cultural producers who are working on a new event or an early stage project. And we select 3 successful applicants who receive access to Autograph space and resources, as well as both a budget and a curatorial fee for the event. So applications for the open call are now open again through Autograph's website. So if you might be interested in applying or would like further details, you can find those on our homepage. As part of Autograph's public programme, this event is supported with funding from Arts Council England, which we're of course very grateful for. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand over to Joe Turnbull, who will be hosting the conversation tonight. Joe is an arts critic and assistant editor at Disability Arts Online, which is an organisation led by disabled people and which was set up to advance disability arts and culture. So Joe, over to you.
Thanks, Livy. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. I'm Joe. I'm a white male in my 30s. I have brown curly hair and a beard. I'm joined by a brilliant panel tonight, really interesting bunch of artists and researchers. The first panellist I'm joined by is Kin of Cultura Plasmic INC. Kin is an artist and essayist exploring surveillance, social relations within digital space and how power operates online. Her recent work is featured in the Wrong Bienniale, Strangelove Time-Based Media Festival, Cryptic Nights, Digital Mental Health Conference, and she is currently a sound pioneer with Yorkshire Women's Sound Network. Welcome, Kin. Would you like to audio describe yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a white female in my 30s. I have long brown hair with a white streak in it. I have a turquoise line under my left eye and a jewel above it. And then I have 3 black squares under that eye as well. And I'm wearing a black and white striped dress.
Thanks, Kin. Our second panellist is Matilda Ibini, a self-described bionic playwright and screenwriter and previous Graeae Theatre Artist-in-Residence. Matilda's play, The Grape That Rolled Under the Fridge, was broadcast on BBC Radio 3 in 2019. She's also had work staged at the Old Vic Theatre, Bunker Theatre and Arcola Theatre, amongst many others. Welcome, Matilda.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm a black woman in her 20s with a shaved head, glasses and dangly earrings.
Thanks, Matilda. And finally, I'm joined by Cyrus Marcus Ware. Cyrus is a Vanier scholar in Canada, visual artist, activist, curator and educator. Cyrus uses painting, installation and performance to explore social justice frameworks and black activist culture. And he's shown widely in galleries and festivals across Canada. He's a core team member of Black Lives Matter Toronto, a part of the Performance Disability Art Collective, and a PhD candidate at York University in the Faculty of Environmental Studies. His ongoing curatorial work includes That's So Gay, Gladstone Hotel, 2016 to 2019, and Blackness Yes / Blackorama. Welcome, Cyrus.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I can describe myself. I'm a black trans man in my 40s. I'm wearing royal blue glasses, a big wooden bead necklace, and a white t-shirt. And I'm wearing my grandfather's vest for good luck.
I'm sure you won't need it. You're going to need it anyway. And finally, on the call with us, we're having British Sign Language interpretation provided by Rachel Veazey. Rachel's a white woman with blonde hair and she's wearing a headset which goes into her ear and to her mouth. So welcome everyone to Disconnect, Disability and Digital Immobilisation. The point of tonight's debate is really to explore critical and disability perspectives on issues around technology, especially around sort of mobility and social isolation. I think in our hyper-connected world, it's arguable that we're actually more isolated than ever. I think it's worth noting that we actually programmed and planned this event several months before the outbreak of COVID-19, but the topic certainly feels more relevant now than ever. The isolation and increased reliance on digital technology communication that we're kind of all experiencing at the minute is something which for many in the disability community is pretty much a daily reality. My sort of thinking behind this event was massively inspired by a book called Open Sky, written by Paul Virilio in 1997. That's the same year that Google was founded, and it's nearly 10 years before Facebook was founded. At the time of writing the book, there was 100,000 websites. There's almost 1.5 billion now. I think Virilio was quite pessimistic, really, about the future of the telecommunications technology and sort of where it was taking us. Some of his major concerns were about the compression of time and space, about the sort of paradoxical hypermobility and also inertia, or worlds sort of shrinking whilst they're growing, and about the colonization of our bodies by digital technology. There's this question of mobility that I think is one of the most interesting, especially in a disability context. So I thought we'd sort of start there. And I'd like to start by asking the panel what mobility means to them. Would anyone like to kick us off? Kin, you happy to kick us off?
Yeah, so when I think of mobility, it makes me think of like opportunities and what opportunities are open. So I sort of think about like where you can go, where you can choose to go. So I think choice is quite important. And I think it's not something that you can do entirely to yourself. It has to be, you know, mobility is opened through societal structures. So I think that maybe you can apply this understanding to physical and digital spaces. And then I was also thinking about mobility as being defined by, you know, who is that mobility defined by and the culture that it emerges from. So mobility within capitalism is going to mean something quite distinct within that system. And then I also think, you know, when we're thinking about mobility, maybe just something that occurred to me was like the language structure of mobile and its opposite, immobile, and there's kind of that kind of positive and negative connotation there. So maybe that kind of shapes how we talk about it.
Thanks, Kin. Matilda?
My understanding of mobility is how the body is able to move through the world, whether that world be domestic, local, communal, global, as well as kind of similar to what Kin was saying, like economic and social. But also I think, like, for me, mobility has always been very intrinsically linked with autonomy and the right to certain spaces, or the right to self-government about where you go, how you get there, and who is permitted, whose bodies are permitted in certain spaces and whose bodies aren't. Yeah, I think mobility has always been it's a very personal experience, but can be a gateway to a very global one. Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think this something you both kind of touched on there, this notion of kind of agency and something to do with power in a way. It's something you have to choose, and so mobility is also kind of a form of privilege, I guess. Cyrus, did you have?
Yeah, I mean, to me, mobility is something that, you know, as a mad person, mobility is something that is surveilled. You know, the ways that mad people get to be in public space is constantly surveilled. So our mobility, you know, even though we may physically be able to go to any space, potentially, depending on our bodies and our impairments, you know, politically, socially, our mobility is limited. because being mad in public space is considered always already a problem. And then you see the things that we have been witnessing over the last 5 years, 500 years of targeted policing of mad people that makes, you know, our mobility limited. So to me, mobility is beautiful. It's a, you know, the ability to be able to go out and travel and be connected with other people. And I know as a mad person that that doesn't just mean physically going out. You can travel in your mind. You know, mobility can be a bunch of different things. But I do know that it is something that is policed and surveilled.
Yeah, that's definitely something I think we'll pick up on later in terms of surveillance in relation to a lot of these themes. Do we think that digital technology is making us more or less mobile? I mean, it's such a strange contradiction that we can order something on Amazon that's made in China and it can arrive on our front doors in 2 hours using Amazon Prime Now, which seems highly mobile, and yet that very fact also is kind of, certainly before lockdown was in place, that you kind of, it's closing your world down as well to the world coming to you rather than you going out to it. So yeah, I wondered what anyone's thoughts are on that, whether digital technology is making us more or less mobile.
I mean, on the one hand, you have the creation of all of these amazing online spaces for people to gather, which, again, disabled people, mad, sick, and disabled people have been doing that forever. We've been gathering online, but now, you know, we're seeing things like in North America, there's a queer club online called Club Quarantine. You know, there are these gathering spaces where people come together to be together, and having gone to them and also having DJ'd at these events, it really does feel like you've gone somewhere. It feels like I've gotten dressed up and I've gone out. I've gone out for the night, even if all I've done is open my laptop. So in many ways, it feels like I'm connected to people all around the world right now in a way that I wasn't before because of technology.
Sure. Matilda, any thoughts?
Yeah, kind of similarly, as someone with a rare condition, being able to, and particularly when that rare condition isolates you in terms of, because of my lack of physical mobility, being able to connect with people all around the world with the same rare condition, like that probably wouldn't have been possible before digital technologies, in the sense a lot of the time we can't be in the same, we can't, we don't, because of the lack of access in our general infrastructure, a lot of us would probably have never had the chance to meet, but this digital technologies have allowed us to be able to not just only meet, but form friendships and a kind of community of all of us who are, you know, none of us are related or know one another, but we're all bonded by having this really rare condition. And I kind of feel that there's a kind of, yeah, a freedom in a lot of digital technologies. But it's quite interesting, I think, in the question in terms of does it make us more or less mobile, because it feels like it comes from a place of, like, I think we've always thought of when we're talking about less or more mobiles from a kind of like non-disabled place, like that actually what is tech doing to non-disabled people, as opposed to, for a lot of disabled people, like tech is giving us the freedom that society denies us. So I find that quite interesting. Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely think in the reading that we had beforehand, when we were reading sections of the text Open Sky, he uses he clearly thinks we're less mobile because of our use of digital technology, and he uses like this phrase doomed to inertia, which is like such a dramatic phrase, and I think it really kind of makes you think about, he has this kind of split between mind and body, and you know, and also it just kind of made me think that he's clearly writing from the perspective of an observer, and thinking if someone looks physically immobile, whatever that might mean, it's like it's from that perspective rather than like the experience, like rather than a subjectivity, I guess. And I think he also said something about if you can experience presence, I think it's like presence at a distance, that we're going to deliberately limit ourselves, and that's how we become immobile, through use of digital technology. And think like an example of this might be like, well, we won't go to the shops if Amazon delivers to us. But again, it's like you were saying, Matilda, it's from this very kind of non-disabled perspective. That reading of the text.
Yeah, there's a notion of the tyranny of convenience. I quite like that phrase in terms of getting across some of this, the shrinking. The easier things are, it can be also problematic. And I think there's also a bit of a false perception that digital technology is these neutral tools that can be used for good or they can be used for bad, but they're neutral, you know, depending on whose hands they're in. But I think we see time and time again that that's not really true, and that there's all these unconscious biases kind of built into all of the tools, technology tools that we use. We see it time again, like Google search, the suggested search, when you start typing in a phrase, the way it'll finish your phrase for you is often extremely right-wing, and the answers it provides to you also the same. And a lot of facial recognition technology is inherently racialized and has racial bias built into it. There's just a couple of examples. But Matilda, your forthcoming play, Aidan, kind of deals with some of these issues, I think. Would you like to talk a bit about the play and your motivation for making it?
Yeah, so Aidan is very much a work in progress, because it's like the world, or specifically looks at AI and health and the social care system, and how governments all over the world are looking to AI as a viable way of tackling rising social care costs for disabled and elderly communities. And I was developing, or am developing, a play around a young disabled woman who is given a robotic carer in lieu of a human care team, and the challenges she faces in some of the biases that have been inputted into or algorithms that have been inputted into this robotic carer, and how she's coming up against essentially like programmed ableism, and how she then, with hopefully what AI allows, is how this character then has to kind of teach the robot to unlearn some of its ableist programming. And it's taken me on an incredible journey in terms of how we're still quite a long way away from robotic carers in the kind of science fiction sense of kind of like, I don't know if anyone's seen that TV show Humans. We're still very far away from that version. But say, for example, in Japan, they are looking into robots that can do very simple tasks in terms of feeding, maybe assisting someone in and out of bed, or on and off the toilet, or in and out of the bath. And even those kinds of robots still require the disabled person to have some level of mobility, that they cannot do the action entirely for that person. So it's taken me down lots of different avenues in terms of how AI could be used and developed within the social care sector. But I think what's the biggest the biggest thing I've learned through like just some of the research and ideas that I've been playing around with were that maybe AI could play a real vital role in being able to bring up like make very subtle and entrenched biases more overt, that for a lot of people, if they're not on that, it's almost like the idea of like microaggressions, for example, when people aren't on the end of them, they struggle to understand, what do you mean microaggression? I'm not being aggressive. What I've said isn't aggressive, and it's far more subtler than that. And AI could be a really useful tool in being able to show, especially the people that program it and create it, their own entrenched biases that they cannot see, or at times even realize that they are enacting. I think has been a really big kind of a big point that I'm still kind of grappling with narrative wise.
I think what struck me as reading the sort of reading about Aidan was it actually seemed, in terms of something that deals with tech and AI, like a relatively positive take in some ways, in that the character is able to repurpose the AI and kind of deprogram its ableist tendencies. I thought that's just really interesting, because often, you know, stuff to do with AI is often all very dystopian.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just interested me, that you're kind of framing it in a relatively positive way in terms of the kind of outcomes that you could achieve.
Yeah, I think me and the director are really conscious about not kind of essentially like doing tropes and the kind of sci-fi tropes of robot gone bad, but we kind of wanted to open it up to a more kind of dialogue and conversation about how AI could work in our world, in our present world, but slightly in the future when we've developed a few more technologies and things. Because I think somewhere in Washington DC, I think they were creating AI that could identify food on a plate and feed it and recognize a mouth. But the way the human brain works, when we adjust the way we pick up certain foods with a particular kind of utensil, a particular kind of pressure, and they were testing out AI to see if it could know how to adjust to pick up a grape or a banana or what have you, and it particularly struggled on soft foods. But there are so many moving parts, and the play that I'm trying to write feels like I'm trying to put all those parts together to see what it could look like, and then the ramifications of that. So it feels at times the research can feel quite overwhelming, because there is so many people are doing so many things. But I think the biggest concern is it seems it's all the same people, that there seems to be a lack of, want of a better word, diversity, or at least inclusion, or the people that they're trying to make this tech for are not being involved in the planning. They're just kind of being present when it comes to testing or evaluating, which by then is almost too late in terms of making kind of more strategic and practical change.
Absolutely. I mean, that sort of reminds me of the old phrase, "nothing about us without us," and that's really important for something like this, where you're designing a piece of technology which is essentially for a certain group of people. If you're not going to involve them in its design, then how is it going to really serve those people? Seems like time and time again that never seems to happen. The people who should be involved in the design are kind of an afterthought, really.
And it costs far more money and time to try and rectify something after you've built it than had you included them earlier on. A lot of things could have been prevented.
Yeah, and I think with the whole AI and robotics kind of debates, I think you're right to not want to kind of reproduce the robot gone bad tropes and all there seems like some great potential in that technology. It's, I suppose, the problem is when they're using it as a way to kind of maximize profit or reduce cost, and kind of outsource care to a robot just because they don't want to kind of either pay for the human interaction, or they think it'll be more efficient, but you know, in some ways there's certain things that you perhaps can't replace.
No, exactly. Yeah, I want to hopefully write a play that does, look at as many perspectives as possible.
Just before I move on, I just wanted to give either, if Kin or Cyrus, if either of you had anything that's sort of come up for you in that little exchange, but if not, move on. Cyrus, I think you're muted.
I was just going to say, I mean, we remain ready for the future as it comes, but, you know, the idea of downsizing or offloading care to AI, I shudder at that. But anyways.
Absolutely.
I can play.
I think what's slightly in common between the two works, Matilda's play Aidan and your ancestors, Can You Read Us, Cyrus, is actually they both strike me as quite positive takes on technology in a lot of ways. In Ancestors, Can You Read Us, it seems the people of the future have been able to repurpose technology and kind of decolonize it and use it as an emancipatory force, and maybe reclaim technology that wasn't necessarily built for them. Do you want to tell us a bit about that work?
Yeah, so Ancestors Can You Read Me is an 8-channel video shot in 4K, and it's set in 2072, and it presupposes this idea that, in fact, we have survived. We've survived climate change, we've survived capitalism, we've survived some of the violences of the world, and we've somehow made it to 2072. And basically our great-great-grandchildren living in that time have figured out a way to use old technology to patch in using, grafting it together and using it in these rudimentary ways. They've figured out a way to communicate with us in the past, basically today's present. And they give us a message from the future. They tell us to fight back. They tell us to overthrow capitalism, and they tell us that we're going to survive and that the world is so much more beautiful than we could have ever imagined, and that we're going to make it as long as we do these things to get ready. And then they thank us for our labor and our efforts changing the world. So anyways, there's these people who, I worked with dancers and performers who played our great-great-grandchildren, and they, again, are trying to connect with us in the present, and the video glitches back and forth between different time zones using found footage from the 60s, found footage from the 20s, found footage from the now. Yeah.
And did you feel a responsibility to make something that was positive?
I mean, I made, I was very interested in this idea. What would happen? What would it take for Black disabled people to survive until 2072? What would need to be different? What would need to happen in our society for us to be the ones who survive? And there's this, activist feminist collective, Black feminist collective from the 70s, the Combahee River Collective, who told us that if we make the world safer for Black people, we're necessarily making the world safer for everybody. So you could assume and follow that line of reasoning to say if Black disabled people have survived into 2072, everybody has survived, because if we've made the world safer for us, then in fact probably everybody has survived. So I was very interested in this idea that perhaps we all could make it, and that in fact it's us. It's those of us who are on the margins who are taking the charge to make this communication happen, to connect with Black folks in the now, and to push forward into the future. I love the idea that we might survive. I have to believe that that's possible. That's what makes me get up in the morning, is this idea that we are going to make it. And so I fundamentally have started making art practices that are about hope, because but I mean, it's also inciting a reaction, because it says we have to fight back. So there's also a little bit of riotous action in there, intermixed with the hope.
Mm-hmm. And what about the sort of relationship to technology in that work? Because obviously they've repurposed the tech, and is that a sort of allusion to the fact that the tech doesn't work for that community at the minute?
I mean, when you look at them in 2072, there's these expansive shots of them in open fields, and they're moving and connecting with each other, and they clearly are in a more naturalized environment than an urban city. So something's happened in the future where there is less condensed building and tech around them, and yet they still are using our old technology as a way of connecting with us. So it is very hopeful that potentially what we've made already might be useful in the future.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that.
Here's hoping.
Yeah, we can all hope for that kind of outcome. Bit of hope. Kin, your work deals with technology in maybe a slightly different way. There's a really interesting use of eye tracking technology and subverting that particular technology in your piece called Living in an Inbox. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Living in Inbox is it's a video and projection mapping installation, and the video component incorporates eye tracking, and it's essentially a kind of sped up 3-minute kind of life in the day. We use mobile technology from the moment we wake up to going to sleep, and it references the language of advertising and marketing. And I think like the way that I was using eye tracking in the piece is that it actually creates quite a disabling environment. And what I mean by that is that in the piece, there's a lot of kind of distraction techniques going on. And so it's like when your eyes are pulled in different ways, it actually kind of triggers a kind of explosion of little mini images which obscure the video behind it. If that makes sense. So the more that you move your eyes around the screen and the more that your attention is being kind of pulled in different ways, the less that you can see. And because I'm always kind of interested in like finding spaces of resistance and kind of reclaiming agency and power, it's like if you practice focus and concentration and you're aware of where your gaze is being led, that the barrier of those images obscuring the video behind, that barrier is less prominent. So yeah, that's how I've used it in the piece.
And so it's a bit like what, advertising pop-ups, that kind of thing?
It's definitely based on that kind of like pop-up model. Yeah.
And what was it about eye tracking specifically that kind of interested you?
I mean, like, I'm just interested in the tools that are being, I mean, eye tracking as well as being an example of something that's been developed from, you know, within the medical industries and you know, and I think there's a lot of these kind of technologies which are developed either there or in the military, and then they become more ubiquitous within marketing and advertising, and that's kind of where they really gain kind of traction. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. Matilda, I wanted to pick up on this idea of that you describe yourself as a bionic playwright, and why that is. And I thought we might, between us as well, dig down into this idea of kind of augmentation and the use of technology in the body.
Yeah, sure. I'd started using the term, or coming to terms rather, with the term bionic when in 2018 I fractured my knee quite badly and I had surgery, and they implanted some metal plates and screws, and it was also kind of the beginning of having to be more dependent on my wheelchair. I use an electric wheelchair to get about, and it kind of just made me reflect on my relationship, one, with my body, now that there was this kind of foreign object in it, and also my relationship with all the kind of tech and aids and adaptations I'd used throughout my childhood, everything from kind of specialized crutches or walking frames to adapted kind of electronic toilet seats or ergonomic chairs. Everything had some kind of power to it, and I started thinking about myself as a person and what it meant to be disabled, and just kind of I've kind of essentially lived a life with tech. Like, I wouldn't have lived this long, I would not be this healthy or where I'm at to this point without tech, in a way. So it felt like it placed itself not just in my life but in my identity, and so yeah, it was after that after that surgery that I started kind of referring to myself as bionic, because I think, especially when I was younger, I mean, I would have loved to have discovered the term when I was younger, because I never found or felt comfortable talking to people about my disability in a way that didn't make me feel embarrassed or ashamed or guilty or something that it felt like something I had to hide. But when the reason I got to the word bionic is because when I was in hospital and a friend was like, well, you're kind of part human, part metal now, and I was like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty cool. I like the sound of that, and it's less to do with like, and especially when I talk about like being a wheelchair user, today the narratives around wheelchairs are simply about being wheelchair bound or confined. And for me, my wheelchair equals freedom. It's the thing that allows, it's the thing that's taken, it's taken the role of what my body used to be able to do, and has kind of made it, made that function of moving far more effective and quicker and less painful. So my wheelchair feels a part of myself, like I don't feel myself without it, which is kind of, yeah, it kind of felt, bionic felt more spiritual, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's all, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a sort of biomedical interface there. And I wonder if there's any, I know that certainly some people in the disability community are kind of would be uncomfortable with certain aspects of their disability always being kind of solved, if you like, or fixed by the medical profession, just because there's such a long history of that being quite an uneasy relationship. Is there, are there any aspects that you would feel uncomfortable sort of becoming augmented as a, or bionic?
That's a good question. I think probably it, and actually I did have this, a random stranger was trying to strike up conversation with me, and because I went to the Barbican, they had like a exhibition on kind of like AI, and there was a robot arm serving cocktails, and I ordered one, and some really random stranger was like, I bet you'd love that as legs, because he saw that I was a wheelchair user, and somehow you know, I want to swap my legs for bionic legs. And I was like, no, I'm fine, I'm good in my chair, like this is how I prefer it, it's my throne. Like I think yeah, I totally understand where that kind of the reticence comes from. It's because of the violence done by the medical world around trying to fix and cure disability. But I think for me, my experience has more been about like these aids and adaptations, things that can be added to my life as opposed to taking away. So it's like I was given a wheelchair to help me mobilize for longer when I'm out, as opposed to we're going to cut off your legs and replace them with bionic legs. Like it's less of trying to fix me, but support my body, support the way my body works. So just and that I feel like that's at least in my experience is made me feel more whole, made me feel more human. That I got a chair that, because my legs or my muscles were giving up, it didn't mean that I had to give up on life, but this chair has then enabled me to continue to do all the things I want to do and more, in a way. So I feel like bionic is kind of like, it feels like as if I'm upgrading the quality of my life, that I get to do more and still have autonomy and still have choice and govern my life the way that I want to live it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's quite a big conversation at the moment about whether our mobile phones are prostheses and sort of extensions of ourselves. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Whether they feel like their mobile phone is an extension of themselves?
I mean, I wouldn't go as far to call it a prosthesis, but I would say, you know, for me, you know, I have bipolar 2 and major depressive disorder, and being able to use my phone to reach out to people when I'm in a bad place has been a lifesaver. You know, being able, even now, you know, being able to do therapy online and being able to connect with my mental health professional digitally allows me to still be able to have that support even in the middle of a pandemic. So yeah, my phone is absolutely a lifeline for me at this moment. But you know, I don't have the experience of having an amputation, so I wouldn't go as far to use that word, but I would say for me it's been absolutely a lifeline.
Kin, any thoughts on that topic?
No, I mean, I think Sarah said it really well, and I think that it's, you know, like, I think it's one of those ones where, and also when Matilda was talking about like, is it something that adds something or takes away? And I think you could argue kind of both perspectives. It's you know, digital technology and mobile technology, it's just so vast, and there's so many different layers and so many different ways you could use it. I couldn't say one or the other.
Matilda, what about you in terms of your relationship to, say, your phone and your wheelchair? Like, is there any parallel there, or?
Not any obvious one that I can think of now. My phone is more just kind of, it meets an access need, like as in to be able to contact my family and carers. Yeah, I don't know, yeah, it's a weird one. And I feel like, yeah, I feel like Cyrus has said it perfectly. I wouldn't, especially as someone who's not an amputee, I couldn't say what that experience is like. But both allow me to live my life on my terms. So I know that it does play an important role. Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's kind of an open question to all three of you, really. What do you think about the common narrative that the internet is a place of freedom and unlimited movement? I mean, clearly there's a wealth of information out there. There's lots of positive things about the internet as a space to move around in, but there's also a huge concentration of power there, arguably as much as anywhere else. If we look at the biggest companies in the world, most of them are tech firms, and they've kind of very much cornered that space as well in some ways. Yeah, Ken, would you like to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, the proposition that the internet is a place of this kind of unlimited freedom, I would be very cynical of that idea. And I'm thinking about, you can't have like mobility and movement without having like location and destinations and places to go to. And I'm thinking like the way that I picture the online space is like, who's designing the roadmap and how we get to any of these places. And so, you know, I'm just so cynical of claims to freedom when it's like, you know, things like Facebook and Google like own 70% of internet traffic. You know, how much freedom of movement is in there? So I'm not sure if it's so simple as just, you know, how we have the freedom of choice to choose where we go to. And then the other thing that I've sort of been thinking about is, you know, the prevalence of like predictive technology and algorithms that kind of, they know how, or models that they know where you're going to go before you do it. And so I think, yeah, I think this kind of like conflation of like past, present and future, and then everything becomes now, then any kind of chance for like different possibilities and changes are really kind of are reduced.
Mm-hmm. And also that predictive technology is also used to influence the way you do behave. And so it's this kind of weird feedback.
Exactly. I mean, definitely in terms of like recommendations and, you know, like things like, I don't know, like Spotify or something, thinking about like the type of music that you're going to like, it's like that is absolutely going to affect your behavior online and the types of content that you access.
Mm-hmm. And if your behavior is completely predicted and predetermined, then that's almost the opposite of freedom.
Yeah.
Yes. Matilda, have you got any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, similar to Kin, I'm a little bit cynical because if you think about how often or frequently we are surveyed when visiting sites and things like that, they're tracking not just our movements, but apparently, you know, cameras can track what we look at on the screen. So that kind of this drive for tech companies and governments to better understand us, unfortunately, is not a positive thing. It's better understanding us to try and control us, to make us, like you say, kind of influence our actions, influence our behaviors, influence what we think or prioritize in our lives. And I feel like the internet does or at least digital spaces do have their advantages, of course, because people from all over the world can find communities, even the most nichest of communities, you can find that you're not alone. But it comes at a cost where tech companies and governments are accruing all this data about us that is then being used against us in terms of even data from our health, to be able to get insurance, travel insurance, life insurance. Like, there's so many knock-on effects on who is accruing all that data, how they use it, and why. I mean, our biggest example are things like the latest elections and Brexit and all that kind of stuff. All sorts of information is coming out about how groups of people were targeted within the digital spaces to sway and influence. So I feel like, yeah, it isn't the kind of the dream fantasy that it tries to dress itself up as.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Cyrus?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is this, you know, I'm very interested in speculative fiction, and, you know, Octavia Butler and, you know, Jameson and all these sort of, you know, writers who imagine these other worlds in the future. And, you know, there is this idea of the altruistic, you know, sort of benevolent resource that is technology. And, you know, we know that that's not the way it goes. It gets used in particular ways to punish, to, you know, to condense, to, you know, it gets used in all these particular ways. And I live in a neighborhood right next to Google Sidewalk Labs, and they're actually trying to create this smart city where, you know, if you read about the smart city that they're trying to create, it is actually quite terrifying when you really read further. They want to create a community that is animated and activated by sharing data. And so if you choose to live in this neighborhood and you don't share your data, you won't be able to access certain stores, you won't be able to walk on certain streets. That there's all these limitations based on how much or how little you share with Google. And to me, that's quite terrifying. So the altruistic nature of technology, I am dubious of that.
Sure. It's, I guess, a related question, but do we, you know, in terms of digital technology creating barriers at the same time as supporting some of the most basic access needs, how do we feel about that paradox?
Yeah, I mean, like, sorry, you, Matilda, were you gonna go? I think that you know, like, for me, like, something really integral to disability politics is you know, those qualities of autonomy and self-determination. And so anything that obstructs those things and get in the way, they are the barriers. And, you know, we can have physical barriers, but it's also, you know, psychological barriers, social barriers, economic barriers. And so I think anything that kind of, you know, we know, with one of the most famous examples being, like, you know, how Cambridge Analytica got involved, and, you know, those kind of manipulation in terms of how we use our communication technologies and how it's manipulating it can be used to manipulate our decision making. They directly undermine any kind of sense of autonomy and self-determination. And absolutely, I would echo what Cyrus was saying as well about the Google kind of smart cities of, like, if you don't give your data away, that's potentially creating a barrier.
Yeah, and here in Toronto, you know, access to the internet is not a guarantee. I mean, it's totally a classed thing, you know. So we, in this pandemic lockdown moment, you know, we're watching all of the children, you know, be told that they're supposed to be doing these online courses and online teaching, and so many families don't have internet at home because it's just not financially possible. And the students are being told to go sit in the parking lot of their school. Like, this is not access with dignity. This is not access, you know, this is not creating a beautiful, more accessible portal for our children to be able to connect with people all over the world. This is them sitting in a parking lot trying to get homework done on some kind of crummy digital Wi-Fi that's being, you know, projected from the school. So we also have to recognize that there's a class experience here, and that for a lot of disabled people, you know, most of us are living below the poverty line. And so, you know, just recognizing that not everybody is even going to be able to have access to digital technology as a way of reaching out and connecting.
Yeah, it's a really important point that's often left out. But yeah, I think it's really important. Matilda?
Yeah, and just I think it's something Cyrus said that made me think of, like, algorithms and how algorithms are being used to kind of take the emotion out of decision making. So like the way, even say something like welfare benefits, if you don't score enough points in a certain, like depending on your answers to certain questions that they've already decided are the correct criteria to make judgments on whether someone is eligible for a particular benefit or not. And all you have to do is input data into it and it will say yes or no, this person is eligible, or no. There's just something about something about, because tech is so neutral, you kind of can get it to do anything you want or need. So if you have a particular target that have to make sure no more than 60% of applications are successful, you will get that outcome. Like it will do that for you without you, so that you don't have to feel the kind of emotions of denying someone access to something they need, even though you know they're eligible for it. So I feel like, in one way, tech can be incredible and amazing and opening up worlds, but also take away accountability from a lot of big institutions, and leave people leave the individual at the end of it just feeling completely and utterly powerless.
Yeah. Another thing that you sort of touched on earlier, Kin, was this notion of technology that's developed ostensibly to help disabled people as access technology, such as eye tracking, but then it's kind of repurposed for much more nefarious means.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's very telling that, like, you know, one of the world's biggest eye tracking companies, Dubai, has, you know, on their website they have like an access section, and then they have a marketing section, and it's like the fact that even those are so intertwined is just, I think it says something about the relationship between the two, and how the technology develops, and how it's justified, and how it ends up in the hands of people who use it for advertising purposes, and more kind of nefarious things that could be manipulating and taking away our autonomy.
Mm-hmm. I think there's loads of examples of that as well. It's looking at things like personal assistants. Like, I've often seen people say, well, actually Siri's a best friend for their autistic child or something like that. And whilst maybe that's a positive thing for that child in the moment, it's like, at what cost? When you're kind of giving your data away and it's kind of surveilling you, and what else is it doing to open up that access is like quite a problem.
Yeah, and also, I mean, voice recognition data sets, and of course, and its ability to help visually impaired people. And so you have that kind of on the one hand, and then with Alexa, but then on the other hand, you also have kind of Amazon getting these deals where they're getting free access to NHS healthcare data to help build their models. So it's a really complicated relationship.
And those virtual assistants also reinforcing like gender biases, because they're all female voices, and reinforcing that women are docile or accept poor treatment. There was, I think, a study or a report by the UN about kind of virtual assistant voices, and why so many of them have female voices or female sounding voices. So there's always kind of like the other side of the coin, that in one respect it helps, but in another respect it's doing something we don't intend or don't want.
And this idea of the voice being the so-called expert that is just as if there was some sort of universal truth that we all agreed on, when we of course know that the voice of Siri or the voice of whoever is telling us what the state wants us to know. So if you were to say, Siri, tell me about Mumia Abu-Jamal, they're not going to say, well, he was a black political prisoner who was really targeted by the state. That's not what they're going to say. They're going to say something terrible and right-wing about Mumia Abu-Jamal. So, we're asking these like benevolent, supposedly neutral fact repositories that are in fact actually more right-wing voices of the state.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that kind of format as well of like the question and answer, and it's a completely like uncritical view of like where you ask a question to Alexa or Siri, and then it's like, and then the answer is provided, and that's just like this fact. And it's like, how is that, who has written that answer, like where has it come from, which algorithms have like prioritized that as being like this is more true than other, you know, other perspectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I reject the notion of objectivity outright, and the fact that you can have an objectively true answer about almost anything. Okay, so sort of as our final question, I wanted to ask all of you, before COVID-19, what your relationship was to online spaces, social media, online spaces to gather, those kind of things, and whether the experience of lockdown and isolation has changed that relationship in any way. Yeah, Kin, do you want to kick us off?
I mean, I would say over the last couple of weeks since being in lockdown, I've definitely seen more theatre and performance online than I would. So I think that that's something that's changed, and obviously there's just been a huge shift of a lot of arts and cultural organisations getting their content online that wasn't previously available. But I guess, I mean, the other thing that's just been like in the forefront of my mind as well during the last couple of weeks has been how it does seem like there's this definitely a danger around like using the current crisis to bring in even more surveillance, and there's obviously been a lot of talk about contact tracing, and how that's and with, you know, with the claim of using our health and well-being and safety as justifying those things. So so I wouldn't say it hasn't particularly changed my experience of online spaces, but I would say that those are the things that are in our mind at the moment.
Cyrus?
Yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who was fairly tapped into technology beforehand. You know, I use it as a DJ, I use it in my visual arts practice, I use it in my performance, but definitely I've done, as you say, I've gone to more parties and gone to more events than I would normally ever do. So my socializing has increased dramatically because there's all of this online content. I've gone to, you know, DJ at parties. I went to an online disabled play party. I went to all sorts of fun. There's just so many interesting ways that people are using technology to gather, and so that's changed dramatically. I wouldn't say that technology was my way of connecting necessarily in these ways beforehand, although I was connected to disability communities online. But now, just to sort of more generally be able to go and hear your favorite DJ from your living room in your sweatpants, it's pretty great. I'm not mad at it at all.
Matilda?
Yeah, I think similarly to both Kin and Cyrus in terms of seeing work that I wouldn't normally have seen or gotten an opportunity to see because of access or infrastructure and things like that. I've also found people are a little bit more accommodating than they normally would be, which is just like really, you just kind of sit back and say, so this was always possible, and you're just choosing not to want to have a meeting online or what have you, or save me the time and effort it takes to be able to get out of my house and things like that. So it's just really interesting how accommodating people have become all of a sudden. But yeah, and I've actually found I've had to, because most of my work anyway is online in terms of like writing or promoting stuff I have out or reaching out to people, I found actually I needed more of a break nowadays, that I need some time away from screens, I need time away from my phone and social media just to be a bit, to keep sane, I think, like just to keep the constant notifications and messages and people wanting to talk at all hours of the day. I've had to kind of like take a step back and be like, actually, I'm not going to talk to anyone today. I'm not gonna, I'm tired. Like, this is a different kind of fatigue that I think I'm experiencing. So I've tried to put more breaks in between my work. I guess the things that would have probably taken me out, since no one is going out, would have been the things that gave me a little bit of like distance and change of pace and things, but I'm finding I just have to like go read a book, go do something that's got nothing to do with the screen for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a really good point. It's something that we're hearing a lot amongst our community on disability arts online, that, you know, a lot of these changes are things they've been asking for decades, and have been constantly met with this is not possible, this is not possible, this is not possible. And then overnight, oh, it's completely possible, we've rolled it out, we've done all these changes. Boom, like how easy was that? Somewhat frustrating, but hopefully it's a positive that we can kind of cling on to, and the positive aspects of it anyway. We can point to that and go, well, look, you've proven you can make it work. You can't really put the genie back in the bottle in some ways, and tell me now that it's not a possibility to open up some of these things. So we're kind of coming to the end of the discussion. Thanks to all of you for your contributions so far. I think really interesting. I think it sort of reiterated the point that where are the disabled perspectives when we talk about these issues in technology. But I think some of the other stuff that's come out for me has actually been quite a positive outlook, that we can retool technology, or we can use it for good if we use our agency as people, and especially for disabled people, to kind of stake that claim, and of course there's power relations involved, so that's not always easy. But yeah, does anyone else have any closing remarks they'd like to make?
I mean, I would just say that we have to always be thinking about, you know, just the ways that the system is not currently set up for us. So anything that's growing out of the system, you know, just to be aware of it, just to be aware of what the possibilities of the you know, follow the money and see where it goes, and who's benefiting from these things that they provide to us for access. I mean, it's rarely done just from altruism. It's rarely done just because they really want to make sure that we have access. There's always some other idea. So just to always be sort of thinking about how this is part of the state, you know, and again, just really going from that Tony Cade Bambara quote of making the revolution irresistible and imagining a future where there's technology that is by us, for us. Imagine that.
Did you want to say something, Matilda?
I know, just that was a beautiful quote.
Yeah, to make revolution irresistible. I mean, that just seems like a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, always to engage your critical thought whenever technology comes up, or in anything, but I think engaging our critical faculties is really important. So we're going to take some questions from the online audience soon. So if you do want to get your questions to us, you can do so in the YouTube comments or by emailing Livy.
There's a really good report, if I can find it, called Scoping Study on Robotics and AI. And I think this was carried out by Skills for Care. And it's a really interesting read in terms of the kinds of research that's currently being done in AI and how that could impact social care, but also the current challenges they face. But one area that has made a little bit of headway is cognitive assistive robots. So kind of AI used to support kind of more cognitive tasks, particularly for people with dementia or Alzheimer's and any other kind of cognitive impairments. The one that I read up on was about this particular project called Companionable, and this kind of interface they nicknamed Hector, that could it's essentially like a smart home. So it would kind of support elderly people or people who spend a lot of time at home for long hours on their own to do kind of daily tasks, everything from opening curtains, switching on and off lights, turning on the cooker, turning it off, things like that. So they've made a little bit more headway in that respect, but in terms of kind of like, I guess, physical robotics and AI, we still have a way to go. And sorry, Livy, what was the second question?
It was around, oh, that's a good question. They're coming in thick and fast. I think it was just about challenging traditional modes of care, and whether revering AI is a privileged view.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a good point. Yes. I'd say, in my opinion, at times it can feel that way, because I think a lot of the tech is built without the people it's for. So by the time it gets to the end user, because it tends to be a lot of able-bodied people in the tech world, in the kind of designing and implementation, and the user is only really thought of in the testing when they're hoping that it's near its end of design, and usually the user is then able to pick up all the problems that they missed on their way in designing particular kinds of tech and AI. So I think, yeah, like as someone who's as a disabled person myself, but as someone who's had a lot of not just care but technology, and have been in a place where I've had to send it back or highlighted things that people just didn't notice that wasn't working for me, or I wasn't able to access, that made this tech therefore inaccessible. Yeah, I think it can definitely feel that way, like it's from a place of privilege.
Yeah. Did anyone else from the panel want to respond? Matilda, Cyrus? I mean, sorry, Kin. Have Matilda. No, that's fine.
Can I just say, I have really, really enjoyed a lot of the comments in the chat. It's been great that so many people have sent in suggestions, and I've learned a lot from some of the things that people have said, especially around the different kind of uses of eye tracking, and the different kind of therapies that people are aware of. And I think there was a question about that someone had sent in about, can technology give us a better relationship with nature? And that just made me think of, I think the example that's coming into my head is, I think there's this artist called Neil Harbison, who has an antenna attached to his head, and that kind of enables him to feel electromagnetic radiation and other kind of signals from the earth. So I think that there are definitely artists working in that area. And I think it feels, I think a lot of people might say that because it's a symptom of living in an urban environment that we feel a disconnect from the natural environment, for lack of a better way to describe it.
Also, Kin, I mean, both...
Sorry,
Cyrus. I was going to say, both Kin and Cyrus, from the work I've seen of both of yours, I actually use the imagery of nature quite a bit, even when talking about technology. That just struck me as quite an interesting thing for that question. But sorry, Cyrus, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I was going to talk about those, there's this technology that they're trying to develop here in Canada where it's sort of like a tricorder from Star Trek, but it would be able to identify any plant. So you can kind of scan plant material or a plant in front of you, and it will tell you all the things that you need to know about it. And I think, like, as we move into this, sort of uncertain future where we may be relying on the land in a different way than we have been, these kind of technologies are really useful for those of us who didn't do a master's in botany, but who need to know how to live off the land. So I was just going to say that. But yeah, in Ancestors Do You Read Me, the natural environment was as important as the technological environment that they're communicating the message through. Like this environment that they're in, where they're in this open field and they're sort of dancing and moving together, was this way of saying that it's not only us that survives, but nature survives too, and that the planet and technology together actually help each other to survive.
Mm-hmm. And I
yeah,
guess
I would say as well, Joe, that you mentioned about, I mean, I would say like in my work, definitely it's not a case of, you know, technology on one side and nature on the other side. It's like they're very much kind of like linked in concepts. And, you know, like one of my pieces, it uses like temperature data, real-time temperature data, and then also global weather forecasts, and then kind of links those together in a space. And it's like using interactive technology to do that, and it kind of uses sine waves that are played through bodies of water, basically. But it's using digital technology in a way that comments on how it conflates distance. And so, yeah, trying to use that in a creative way, I guess, to comment on that.
Also, on the flip side, and not wanting to always be the negative and critical person, Kin, I know that also you've done work around the actual the negative impact of technology on the environment, which is often unseen and often hidden. Do you want to talk anything about any of that, like the ecological impact of data farms and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, again, like some of the artists, I mean, Joanna Moll is an amazing artist who definitely works in that area as well, of raising awareness of the materiality of the digital environment, and how many, you know, the impact on and the strain that it puts on natural resources, in terms of, you know, the amount of CO2 produced from data farms and, you know, energy production and things like this. So yeah, but I would say that from the comments in the chat as well, something that really kind of stood out to me was that it's, you know, it's obvious that you know, online spaces are a huge resource for disabled people in encountering social isolation. And, you know, even, you know, like Disability Arts Online, it exists as a space to counter that social isolation that disabled people are particularly you know, particularly experience. And so it seems to me that it's, you know, that's why issues of privacy and surveillance are like especially important to address in the community, because there isn't an option, or so much of an option, to opt out of using digital technology or not to use social media platforms. And it's really hard. And if there's not that option available to you, then it's, yeah.
Yeah, you're forced into the hands of big tech, who unfortunately don't have our best interests at heart as much as they'd like to say that they do. And if you're a disabled person and that's your only way of engaging, and we're all in that boat at the moment because of COVID-19, but we're kind of being funneled into the hands of people who don't necessarily have our best interests at heart.
So I just wanted to, I appreciate we had a bit of a tech issue in transitioning into the question and answer session. So just to reiterate, we're having some really brilliant comments on the YouTube channel, and it seems like people are really keen to share their experiences and respond to some of the conversation tonight. And I'd highly recommend just having a look through people with all sorts of experiences that are related to the conversation that aren't necessarily questions, but are worth a little platform. So on that note, one of the comments I thought I'd just mention, they say, as a housebound person, I'm online a great deal. It's my window on the world. However, when I have tried to encourage my long-term non-disabled friends to join me on YouTube, on Second Life, I'm told things such as, I prefer real life. It seems to me that the online meeting point for disabled and non-disabled people is not working. There's a prejudice to the idea of joining a disabled person online, and that's been their experience. Did any of you want to talk about that in terms of just the sort of different uses and experiences of online culture between disabled and non-disabled realms?
I mean, I wonder how that person has experienced any changes in attitudes since the lockdown, because there hasn't been the option of, oh, I prefer real life, and a lot of people are adapting to, you know, what other people have done for a very long time now.
And I've heard, you know, that there's like groups, you know, it's also, you know, there's the ways that race plays into this. And like I've heard, in North America, on Turtle Island, Indigenous communities meeting and doing ceremony in Second Life, as a way of gathering in the now, as much as I've also heard of, sort of Black folks gathering to kind of commemorate and have vigils and in these online spaces. I think that, as you say, I think exactly this is a different time. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing a lot of non-disabled communities, as you say, catching on to what we've been doing forever. So there's already this strong, beautiful web and network of online resources for disabled folks. I'm thinking of groups like Sick and Disabled Queer People of Color. I'm thinking of the online support groups, all of these things that we've built over the last, 30 years of disability justice, are already and available for us to help us through this quarantine period. And I think for a lot of non-disabled communities, they're desperately searching for that kind of community. There be feeling very
great.
Yeah.
There's an element that Joe and I discussed a bit as well, and we wanted to maybe think a bit more about mental health in relation to some of the conversation tonight. And Cyrus, you spoke about the positive impact of being able to engage with your therapist directly and digitally. But I wondered if we could dig a bit deeper into some of the negative aspects of the relationship between mental health and digital technology. Joe was thinking about things like poor body image, increased anxiety, or an over-reliance on smartphones, and the need to tell them, some of our deepest secrets through therapy.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a strange thing to do, because one of the things that happens when you're doing these kind of conversations online is that, of course, I'm talking out loud and anybody can hear. It's not like I'm in a private therapist room with the door closed and some noise music in the background. I'm, talking out loud. And so there's all sorts of ways that for a lot of people, not everybody lives in a giant home with just 2 people. Many of us live in small apartments with 5 people. And so how do you have the privacy that you need to be able to get that online support when, you're talking out loud and everybody can kind of hear? And what if what you want to talk about is about how your roommate keeps leaving the toothpaste lid off, and that's what you want to talk about, but your roommate's right outside the door while you're having this supposedly private session, right? So I think that there's like ways that the close quarters effect that we're living in, definitely affects our access. And then, as I said, in the discussion that we had earlier, not everyone even has internet access to begin with. So to be able to even think about the class implications of having, who gets to have access is definitely related to who has financial resources to have internet in their home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where I'm based in Glasgow, so recently Glasgow Disability Alliance did a survey, and of the people that they surveyed, only 37% had access to broadband technology in their home. So straight away there's that, who has access to it and who doesn't. But then there's also the flip side of when we're talking about access to online spaces and privilege and class. It's like there's also a privilege of being able to switch off, and like people who work in Silicon Valley, that whole thing of digital detoxes, and actually having the privilege to get away from an online space and having that option to switch off.
And also there's that piece of yours that I've seen called Hold Me, which is a lot about mental health and people using the internet as a therapist, with a kind of communal response on the other end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in looking at just how people are more open and more honest about their feelings and emotional states, and that's I think in terms of things like the Eliza effect, where people feel more comfortable revealing really intimate and personal details about their lives to a computer, or and things like this. And so I think that has to be something to bear in mind when we're thinking about protecting our rights, basically. And there was also another really interesting, because I think there's one thing about accessing therapy online when you have a relationship with another person and it's just via an online medium, but then there's another thing of all the apps that are available on that you can download and that use kind of chatbots and things like that. And I think there was a really interesting report last year by Privacy International, going into how it was really like some really shocking findings around like third-party data sharing, and especially things where people were entering really intimate things about their lives in terms of to, you know, self-diagnose if they had depression, and then that data was then being passed on and used not in a health context at all, but more for advertising. And so I think that, yeah, there's that whole arena that just needs, if we are going to be providing mental health care support via digital technology and via, you know, via apps, and people are relying on apps, then they need to have regulations on how that data is used. And, you know, like social media companies and apps, they're not subject to the same, you know, they don't fall under things like the federal healthcare data privacy law and things, which yeah. So those things need to be addressed.
There was a question in the DAO Facebook group. Let's find it, from Mira Takaya, and they were asking if any of the panel had recommendations for theatre or performance that they've seen online during lockdown, especially sort of disabled-led stuff.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, if people want to use this platform to promote their own works, if there's any things you'd like to say, we've had a lot of interest from people about the projects you're working on. So if there's any shout outs you'd like to do, please add them on here. Just a quick fire round of recommendations from you would be great. So Matilda.
Hopefully it's still online, but a really great, I think she describes herself as a cyborg, Sophie Woolley, has a show on online somewhere. If you Google her name, she's brilliant, and follow her work. And I have a short piece, funnily enough, around social care and the pandemic on BBC iPlayer. It will hopefully be on at the end of this month or beginning of next month. So yeah, check that out.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I know that Graeae Theatre Company are doing a lot of things online. I believe that Artificial Things from Stopgap was recently being made available as well to watch on YouTube in full. And then also I've just been really enjoying listening to Disruption Network Lab, which isn't disability led, but just really interesting lineups of panels and artists and researchers discussing similar topics to what we've been talking about today.
Fab. And Cyrus. Cyrus, you're on mute.
Yeah, there's so many great things that are coming out. I mean, there's so much to check out. I would definitely look at the video of Toshi Reagan's version of Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower that was broadcast live, and that's online. There's a theater company in Toronto called Other Hearts, run by Yusuf Kadura, that is disability and BIPOC led, that is doing sort of puppet-based theater that's about to come out, I think, in the next couple of weeks. I have a lot of my videos and a lot of my work online, including Ancestors Do You Read Me? You can check it out on my website. And yeah, I'm so excited to see what's coming, because people are innovating all sorts of new ways of putting their content in new forms online. So I look forward. Maybe people can post stuff that they're doing as well in the YouTube chat, because I'd love to check out what everybody else is working on.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I guess a bit of shameless self-promo for some of Disability Arts Online stuff. So we had an open commissions program for disabled artists in response to COVID-19. They'll be kind of released periodically from this month. We'll be doing a bi-weekly artist, so fortnightly artist talks with a different disabled artist giving a presentation about their practice. So that'll be every fortnight, starting from the end of this month on every other Wednesday. So hopefully that'll be great. We've got some new podcast series coming out as well. And within our open commissions, we've got a real breadth of interesting stuff, from private plays to interactive workshops online, and lots of day in the life of articles about from various disabled artists, basically.
Brilliant. In that case, I think all that's left to do is wrap up. Joe, did you have some concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say really that I think the disability arts movement and disability rights movement have always been about the struggle for human rights. And I think the digital realm is very much a place where those human rights can be actualized, as we've sort of seen from what the panel have been saying. But it's also a place where they're arguably under greatest threat. You know, it's the far right have co-opted a lot of the digital platforms massively. There's a huge concentration of power and wealth online in digital spaces, you know, with a tiny amount of individuals and organizations. And as we've already talked about, the surveillance and the misuse of data is also a big threat to human rights for disabled people and for everyone. And I think it's just really important that we're all vigilant about that. But I'm also positive about the role that art can have to play in all this. I think art, especially art by disabled people, but all sorts of art, it has the power to highlight those contradictions and look at the good and the bad of technology. And the other thing that art does, probably better than anything else, is it allows us to imagine new futures. And I think that's absolutely what we need now. So other than that, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us this evening who's been tuning in. I'd really like to thank the panel, and also thank you to our BSL tip, and of course thank you to Autograph for hosting us.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate all that Joe just said there. Yeah, thanks to everyone involved. It's been a brilliant conversation, and thank you to all the people who've interacted with the event online. It's been a really nice turnout and some really amazing conversation happening there. Again, do look at the comments. There's been a lot happening. I'd just like to give obviously thanks to Disability Arts Online, to Joe, to the guest panellists. As mentioned at the start of the event, Autograph will be reopening the open call series for applications, which will be through our website. So that's for any early stage or creative individuals who'd like to propose a digital event to run at Autograph. We provide a budget and a curatorial fee. Information about that should be online in the next couple of weeks, so please do check our website if that's something you might be interested in, and you can sign up to our mailing list. Also in line with what Joe was just saying about the fundamental issue of human rights at the heart of all this, Autograph will be running a series of events about rights in light of COVID-19 and the impact that's had on various marginalised communities, such as disabled communities, migrants, and racialised issues around that. So if you're interested in that, again, do sign up to our mailing list. We will be emailing out a feedback form at the end of this. If you're able to fill that out, that would be really helpful, be really useful just to get people's thoughts on the event tonight, as it's a new format for us. So all that's left to say now, I think, is thank you and good night to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.